Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Hello and welcome. It is Thursday, April 10th, 2025, and this is the Conference of World Affairs at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Today's panel is, can we bring back the truth in this disinformation age? My name is Vicki Sama, and I am the panel moderator. I am a journalism professor who teaches media law and ethics classes, as well as reporting courses. I am a former journalist who covered wars, politics, and other global issues at CNN. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today, but before I introduce them, I'm going to read the university's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder's flagship university honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Utah, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from those territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty in their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Another thing I'd like to mention before we get to the questions is how this is going to work. We're going to reserve the questions for the end of our discussion, and if you'd like to ask a question, we're going to be using note cards. Simply raise your hand, and one of our producers in the room will come to you with a note card and a pencil, and you can write your question on the note card and hand it back to them. If they have to leave you while you're writing your notepad just on your note card, just raise your hand and they'll come back to you and pick up your card. If you're a student, please mention that you are so on your note card. And please keep your questions brief and to the point. So let me get started with introducing our panelists. Immediately to my left is Jose Marichal. He is a professor of political science at California Lutheran University. His research focuses on how algorithms and artificial intelligence reshape social and political institutions. He has an upcoming book, You Must Remain an Algorithmic Problem. Next, we have Rania El-Malki. She's a journalism professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, where she teaches video production and documentary. She is a former journalist who was editor at the Daily News Egypt. Next to her, we have Karin Gronvall. She's the National Librarian of Sweden, and she oversees the legal deposits for print and digital materials, basically overseeing all of the artificial intelligence operations going on at the library. And then we have Louis L. Reed, an award-winning author, commentator, licensed addictions practitioner, and criminal justice reform advocate. He was a consulting producer for Hulu's Unprisoned series. LA Weekly named him one of the top 5 people to follow in 2023. So to start our panel discussion, I'm going to open it up and we'll start with Jose, and then we'll just go down the line. With opening comments from our panelists about anything they want to say first about this topic we have about truth and disinformation.
Thank you. So this is my first time at this conference, and this is my third panel, and each one of the topics have been incredibly diabolical to ask people to talk about in 5 minutes. This one may be the most diabolical of all. You're asking people, especially someone who's trained in political thought, to talk about truth in 5 minutes, but I'm going to try. So I write about technology, but my training from CU Boulder in political science department, PhD, is in public policy. And when I teach public policy to undergraduates, one of the weeks we talk about truth. And one of the questions I ask them is the reason why we can't solve problems that the class might think is obvious, like climate change, is it an ignorance problem? Is it that some people know the truth and other people lack the truth? And if the people with the truth could somehow shake the people without the truth, they would actually just wake up, and we'd all have a happy consensus, and we'd solve all the world's problems, and we'd live in this utopia, right? And obviously, the world doesn't work that way. No. Yes, that's right. No. And why is that, right? I mean, because there's a difference between truth and fact, right? There are facts, but those facts have different meanings to us because we have different value propositions, because we come to life with a different set of priorities, with a different set of things that we think are dear, with the things we value. Now, again, I am not going to get into the Platonic forms in the cave and get into these broader questions about whether or not there's ultimate truth or not, because that you write a PhD, you write a dissertation on whether or not that stuff is true. But we do. Everybody will agree that we have different value propositions, and so our interpretation of facts differ, right? So this makes truth complex, right? And some of these value propositions are incommensurate, and we can think about things like, the abortion debate, right? You can identify a set of things that are true, facts about the world, but people are going to interpret those facts differently, and they're going to argue about it. And so to say that we're going to ever arrive at a position of truth on that issue is challenging. What's happening to us as a society is that I think that more and more things are becoming what you'd call incommensurate, that it's difficult to find a way that we're going to come to a resolution on, right? An increasing number of things are what some scholars call, we can't arrive at epistemic consensus, right? And increasingly, we don't just differ about values, we differ about reality, right? So that's an even broader step in terms of just not being able to agree. Because it's one thing to say this is a table, and we may disagree on whether or not we like the design of the table, but it's another thing to disagree about whether or not it's a table at all, right? And so I think we are moving towards what's called an epistemic, what do we call it? A lack of epistemic consensus. Why is that? A lot of reasons, right? COVID, I think, has really has changed our politics in ways that we're still trying to wrap our head around. A lack of trust in institutions that, in some cases, have been earned by those institutions. Social media, right? What I study, all these things have conspired to, I think, cause a lot of fear, disorientation among a lot of people. I like to say, when I study social media, that we are information rich and materially poor, right? Not that we lack abundance, but that there's a lot of inequality in society, and a lot of people, more and more people in our society are struggling to pay bills, to be able to afford to buy a house, to be able to pay off their loans for college. So in a lot of ways, we're becoming increasingly materially poor, but increasingly information rich. That there's so much information out there, right? That there's so much knowledge, knowledge is wrong. There's so many words, there's so many images, there's so many things out there that it's really difficult to figure out what's true and what's not, right? And, we're going to talk about, can we ever get back to this? We've always had conspiracy theorists, right? I'm getting old. You can tell by the, gray in my beard. And so I remember, 9/11, and people would be like, hey, have you seen this video, Loose Change? 9/11 didn't happen the way you say it. So we've always had that. There's a great, somebody I assigned, Richard Hofstadter, wrote an essay on the paranoid style in American politics that basically ever since the American founding, we've had this kind of, distrust of institutions, distrust of government, distrust of like the official truth, right? It's kind of part of the American tradition to sort of be skeptical, to be suspicious. But the difference, right? The difference is that we used to have gatekeepers that would sort of funnel and channel sort of the paranoid interpretation of reality, so it didn't become sort of the mass way of thinking about the world. But what social media did is it kind of took away it knocked the legs out from the gatekeepers, right? Some of you, I'm not going to guess this to anybody's age, but some of you remember, and I'll tell my students this because once upon a time, you wanted to know what was going on in the world. There were 3 news networks, and you had to watch them at 6:30, right? Is that right? 6:30, I think it was. Local news came at 6, and then 6:30 was the national news, and you either watched CBS, ABC, or NBC, and that's what you got. And whatever happened in those 30, you could watch McNeil Lehrer, right? So you had 4 options, and whatever they did in 30 minutes, that was the truth. And if you were a little bit more informed about the world, you got a newspaper, and it came to you in the morning, and you sat there with your cup of coffee, and you read the newspaper. And what was interesting about reading the newspaper, right? Someone decided these are the things that an informed citizen needed to know to be an effective citizen in a democracy, right? You needed a business section. You needed an entertainment section. You needed a front page. You needed an international affairs section. And because, we can't all eat we can't just eat broccoli, you had a sports section, right? That's not the world we live in anymore, right? Like, we get to curate our epistemological reality, we get to curate what it is we choose to think the world is, right? And that's very different than the way it was 30 years ago.
Jose, do we want to pass the microphone first, and then we'll get back to that?
Oh,
too?
sure, yeah. Okay.
And I've been asked to make an announcement if people could squeeze together a little bit. That we have some people in the standing room in the back who'd like to sit in, and we have at least 12 seats up front here in the first 3 rows that are empty. So more people come in, you can direct them up towards the front. Okay, and there are very nice people raising their hands to let you know that their seat's empty. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Okay, sorry. Okay, Rania.
Thanks for starting us off, Jose. And this is really, really interesting. So, as you know, my background is I was an editor at Daily News Egypt, which I edited between 2005, 2006 until 2012. And that was a very contentious time in Egypt. I don't know if anyone is familiar with this, what happened, but we had an uprising, and it was like the peak of my career, covering that uprising. And when Jose talked about gatekeepers, I mean, I'll just explain to you what the media landscape looked like in Egypt at the time. So we have a state-owned media system. This is something that you have been shielded from in your country, I think, for most of your lives. I don't know what's going to happen later. I've been sensing a lot of anxiety about the future ever since I came to Boulder. And I mean, I also watch the news. I watch American news. I'm very interested in what happens in this country, obviously, because it impacts the rest of the world in ways that maybe some of you may not be fully aware about. Anyway, so we have a state-owned kind of media setup where the former regime that was ousted in 2011 basically gave the citizens a little bit of freedom to vent through newspapers like mine, for instance, where we had relatively a lot of freedom, but we were very aware of what the red lines were. So it was clear. You can't talk about 1, 2, 3 topics. Otherwise, the paper is going to be pulled, because the publication I edited was online, and it was also in print. So I was in that. I worked in that very interesting time where there was a transition, from the print to online and the digital boom and social media. And my publication was a sister publishing partner for the International Herald Tribune, which was the global edition of the New York Times back then. So we were sort of on the cutting edge of the media landscape. Anyway, so what happened when the uprising took place? So our national TV building is on the Nile, facing the Nile. And Tahrir Square, which was where all the protesters ended up going, is literally like 1 mile away. But national television had this footage of feluccas. Feluccas are traditional boats on the Nile. That's what they were airing when people were being, basically, a protest was being stamped very violently a mile away. So that's what was going on national TV. But it wasn't happening on social media, because that's what they called it. They called it the Facebook revolution, right? Or the Facebook uprising. So people naturally went to social media to know what's going on. And there was also Al Jazeera. There were a few independent outlets out there that people referred to. And then what the government did was not very clever for them, because they shut down the internet. They literally switched it off. So how else were people going to communicate with each other except by going out into the streets? And this is what happened, right? So this is exactly what happened at the time. And I'm telling you this story because I think it can take us to the net. So there was a time when social media was not the conduit for disinformation. So at that time, social media was the truth, right? But now it's a very, very different situation. And both back home in Egypt and I think over here, and I think all over the world, because of the political polarization, right? Because of so many voices, like Jose was saying, there's so much information out there, but very little like truth. And so what is truth? And I think we're going to discuss this further. But for me, I think the solution to, I shouldn't be maybe talking about solutions, but I think the problem is a problem of access, really. I mean, journalists need to have freedom to cover the stories that matter to the people, to their communities, right? And I'm seeing, the access issue becoming a problem in this country. For example, access to White House press conferences. So we're reading about how the pool works. I'm not really 100% familiar with how that works, but what I'm understanding is that the president or his people decide who ends up in the press room, right? Is that how it works? I mean,
traditionally, the decision on who would be in the White House press pool is decided by the White House Correspondents Association, not by the White House.
Oh, okay.
Now it's being decided by the White House.
Yeah, so I think that's a problem. With us, access has always been difficult, almost impossible. Like for me, as I was a journalist for 15 years in Egypt, and it was impossible for me to get, a pass to cover the presidential, press, to be in the president's presidential palace. So access. And I also think about access on bigger terms, about, independent news organizations having access to where conflicts are happening. The international media still does not have access to Gaza, for example. There's been a war going on for over 16 months, and the only people covering it are the local journalists who are from Gaza, who are Palestinians, who are being deliberately targeted, right? 232 journalists or media workers have been killed, and their families targeted over that long period of time. And this is also about access. And if journalists don't have the freedom and the physical capacity to be where the news is, to cover it and show their readers that they are there and they are bearing witness on their behalf to what is happening, wherever it's happening, then people are going to turn to social media, and it's going to be the same, like vicious circle of disinformation or extreme views that are not really true, right? So, there have been some initiatives, like fact-checking initiatives online, and most news organizations and agencies now have a fact-checking sort of part of their website where they go back and and break everything down and deconstruct whatever piece of news there is out there or that's going viral that people are just lapping up, and it may have nothing to do at all with the truth. So, yeah, I think that's what I have to say for now. Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. When I heard of this diabolic topic about the truth and what can we bring back the truth, I thought being the national librarian, working with the legacy and bringing the legacy to the future, etc. I was thinking about, through history, do we need to go back to Plato? Where do we go? But I also thought about, we all know about the Ministry of Truth in George Orwell's 1985. It's coming up more and more these days, the references to that book and that novel. And we know that the truth was nothing else. It was mainly lies and manipulation. We know that they talked about the famous phrases, the war is peace and freedom is slavery, etc. We also know that the official newspaper and the official media of the former Soviet was called Pravda, which means truth. So the concept of truth has always been used for different reasons, and it's always been up for negotiations, really. And it was really interesting to hear you here to say that there was a time in social media was the truth, that makes some perspective. It's always up to negotiation. And a lot of people always say to me, well, you're in the library sector. Well, you have the truth. That's lovely. And that's, in my introduction, they refer to our legal deposit, and that's that we get everything printed, everything recorded, everything that's been on television, and we keep everything for the future. And that's all about access. It's all about being able to go back for democracy reasons to see what did he say, what was the discussion, what the public conversation at that time. But it has nothing to do with the truth. It has to do with the public conversation and to find the sources and to say that these sources have not been changed and everyone will have access to them. So that's sort of at the heart what the libraries can do. And access is fundamental. I have another example when also archives that are quite close to the library sector, they don't maintain truth either. And after the wall fell in Eastern Europe, they opened up, as you know, all the archive, all the Stasi archive, so much information. And people went there and they could see that their brother-in-law had been telling them lies about themselves, or whatever. But also, everything was not true in those archives, especially for these agents being sent abroad. They wanted to report back home, and they wanted to be appreciated. So they wrote that they had met a lot of people and had done and that, but that wasn't true at all. But they wanted to, be appreciated and be liked by the party. So the concept of truth is really, it's under negotiation, and we have to be really careful about using it. I think what we really need to do is to strive for the truth. We can't say that we have the truth. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to forego my opening statements just in the interest of time, just because I see that the audience seems to have a generated interest, and I see cue cards going over there. So I'll defer back to you if you want me to, and then we can kind of get to my opening statements when there are some remarks.
Louis, if that's, I think the audience would love to hear from you.
Okay, okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that our conversation is actually going to be interactive. Look, the area of my specific specialty is in criminal justice reform. I did 14 years in federal prison, and when I think about truth, I think about the immediate stereotype and notion about disinformation that happens to have a political affiliation and or connotation to it. However, when people say that we're in a disinformation crisis, they say it like it's some new phenomenon. Really. However, for those of us who've lived on the margin of society, women, people who have disabilities, especially those who've been impacted by the criminal legal system, truth was never a given for us. It was never a given. It was always something that we had to fight for. When you think about terms where I come from, when you think about terms that go back to the 90s, when the references about black men, super predators, There was nothing truthful about that statement. When you think about the stereotype that we have about people who don't look like us, who don't come from spaces in life where we come from, et cetera, there's nothing truthful about that statement. In all actuality, we're functioning from a preconceived notion about who those individuals are, and we actually perpetuate that notion as if it's truth. Let me say that one more time for the people in the back. Oftentimes, when people don't look like where we come from, who we are, they don't have the same education that we have, et cetera, we have a tendency to perpetuate a stereotype about those individuals as if it's truth. As if it's truth. And so I didn't need social media to teach me how dangerous a lie can be. I know people in my family, I know people who come from my community who were wrongfully convicted over a lie. I know how people who have criminal histories have seemed to be, have their crimes perpetuated in the news, and that seems to be circulated as if it's the truth. An arrest, we're not talking about a conviction. We're not talking about a conviction. Think about how many times you saw somebody be arrested. In this country, we are supposed to live on the premise that everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But you see someone with an arrest and they might have a blurb in the crime blotter, or they might come across your news break or your social media feed, et cetera, and you take that arrest as if it's truth. And you never see a redaction when that person is exonerated. You never see another headline when that person is probably found not guilty or anything else. But I digress. Back to you.
Thank you all for those opening comments. I'm going to go right to the questions from our audience. All right, I love the start of this question. If I were a younger person...
Oh, you are. You are.
Well, whoever you are, you are.
You are.
They would say, I would have an extremely difficult time finding the truth. How would you suggest that this is best done if you were younger? Or how about even if you weren't younger?
I think, Jose, you should talk about your algorithms. And then maybe about how to navigate them.
Okay, well, so first of all, I'm really hopeful about young people, because I think that they get the environment that they're in, and they want to figure out how to have a omnivore's information diet, right? So I think the advice I'd give students is the advice I'd give myself, and I'd give anybody else, is just do what we've always taught, which you probably, if you went to college 30, how many years ago? What am I using numbers for? But I mean, there's always been, the truth has always been nuanced and messy and difficult to find. So you have to have a humility about that, and knowing that, to actually get at the truth of things, you have to read widely, and you have to check your sources, and you have to, who is this person? Why do I trust this person? And so the task isn't any different than it has always been in that regard. So maybe I'll talk about algorithms a little.
Yeah. I think it's yes.
No,
Would you like to go? Go.
No,
Sure,
no,
sure.
no, you go.
No, well, my first thought was that I think it's pretty obvious, and everyone now knows that the algorithm controls everything, right? We're living in this meta universe where the algorithms control what we see on our feeds, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for younger people, I think they're very, very lucky, but they have a huge responsibility, right? They have a huge responsibility to seek out some semblance of truth in all this noise, right? And to actively go and seek outlets that they ideologically disagree with. Like you watch what's going, the news of the Middle East on CNN or on Fox News, you have to go to Al Jazeera. You have to see both sides. You can't just see one side. And then there are facts. Facts still do exist, guys. We are not in a post-truth world. There is such a thing as a fact, but you have to establish what that is by, cross-checking everything. And at schools now, there's a lot of media literacy. So my son is 14 years old, and they study, they teach them how to sift through the media that they're watching and reading and consuming. And so, I don't think there's an excuse for not like knowing even approximately what's actually happening. And I think there needs to be an awareness of where we position ourselves ideologically also, and just be open to other truths that may not be what we want to hear. You know, the confirmation biases that we have been, I mean, we're all guilty of that, obviously, but we have to kind of get out of that comfort zone and try to seek out what is not what we actually believe reflexively, you know. So, yeah, that's what I have.
Well, I would refer to what you started with, Jose, that it is a bit more complicated than it used to be. I mean, you don't have yourself a reference so easily to say. And I think, yeah, you can say, go in and look at all sources, listen to all news. It's getting too much, I think, really, even for young people. So I think we also have to think about trust in this part. Who do I actually trust? Can I go back and seek, you know, have discussion and seek information and hold on to some sources that I do really have trust in? Because you can lose your compass if it gets too overwhelming and too ideological. So I would say put the trust in and make sure you have trust in something.
Yeah, I would just echo, you know, everything that my colleague said. Also, just to add as a PS that in my mind, I think that disinformation is just propaganda with better Wi-Fi. And you know, to Jose's point, I think that we now live in a world where algorithms drive public opinion faster than the truth can actually catch up. My grandmama would have put it this way: the truth can travel around the world twice before the lie can travel around the world twice before the truth can even get out of the bed. And so if the algorithms get more airtime than the facts, we are not in an information age, we are in an influence war. And so, you know, Jose opened up with this notion that I completely agree with, that you got more information, right? We have more information. You got to be able to parse through that information. But are we really in the information age, and or are we in a war of influence? Because in my mind, that's what it feels like. It feels like people are trying to win you over to their notion, their way of thinking, their perception, so on and so forth. And so when you're searching for the truth, in all actuality, I don't think that it actually begins on a campus like this. In my mind, it actually begins when you're a child. There's something that we're hardwired with that's called principles and values and truth, right? And we got spider senses, where when somebody seems to be giving you information, you got to fact check it. You verify, you trust but verify. Trust but verify. All right, well, you know, it reminds me, and this is the little preacher boy that's inside of me, but one of the things that the Apostle Paul, in all of his genius, and he had more degrees than a thermometer, when he was trying to proselytize this community, they say, Paul, we hear that we understand that you might be viral on social media, and we understand that you might have been in these spaces of privilege, etc. But we're going to search the facts to see if whether or not what you're saying is so. And so where I'm going to land on these comments is that you got to search. You got to search to see if whether or not what people are telling you is so.
Thank you all, yes.
That was really a golf clap. I was looking for something that was like NBA, NBA LeBron. All right, there we go.
You know, we're talking a lot about truth and lying, and I just wanted to share this with you. During a week of my media law and ethics class, I dedicate a whole week to just talking about truth and lying. And I give my students an exercise to try to go 24 hours without even telling what you call a white lie, a small lie. And then we have a discussion about if they were able to accomplish that, how difficult it was. In fact, I see some of my students in the room. And they could probably tell you that it was a lot more difficult than they thought. And the reason is because a lot of the theorists that we're reading are saying that if you tell little lies, they eventually become bigger lies, and then bigger lies because you have to tell additional lies in order to support the initial lie. And so therefore it starts to blossom and bloom, and the lies become more and more. But it's one thing to tell a lie unintentionally, right? And there's another thing to have the intention, which is what we're talking about. Disinformation is intentionally creating lies in order to control people, in order to control how people think and what they do, and to control their actions. So that's going to segue into this question that someone asked here. Once disinformation is out of the box, it's retweeted, it's repeated, it's shared, how do you remove it? How do we even find the original source of it? And what do we do about it? Anyone can take that question.
Okay, more diabolical questions. Right. Well, look, let me start off by saying, taking up what Ronnie asked me to do and talk about algorithms, which algorithms flatter us, right? Because where do they come from? It's not like there is an algorithm. I mean, like, what's useful about algorithms is that they figure out what you like and they give you back to you, right? Like, they give you what this very complicated mathematical formula is determined you're going to like, because the whole name of the game is to keep you engaged on the platform, right? So it's it's us. We're flattered by it. I mean, who are we to be like, my media environment has to be completely dominated by the things that I already like? I mean, what about personal growth? What about evolution? What about becoming instead of being who you are in the moment, right? That's what I was getting back to about the newspapers, right? Because the newspaper is like, no, this is what you need to know. Some external person, some external editor with knowledge and training and credentialing has told you this is what you need to know to be a good citizen. But now we're in a consumerist age where the whole game is to flatter us by giving us back to us. Now, how does that fit into the question about propaganda? Well, we need to have the humility to realize that we're not the be all and end all, right? We're not the totality of the human experience. There are a whole bunch of other people out there with other views and other life experiences and other things that they could teach us about. You know? This is my third panel, and it feels like every single time I come back to community. I come back to, get out of your house, go to the supermarket like we were talking about before. Instead of having the Amazon package delivered to your house, go out to the supermarket, engage in random, spontaneous conversations. The only way you're going to combat disinformation is by being in community and by learning about the other and saying, oh yeah, I know that person. That's not true about that person. That immigrant, that's not the way immigrants are, right? And I think that's the only solution is to actually step out of ourselves, right? Is to get over ourselves, But algorithms make it hard.
Anyone else want to attack that?
Yeah, I love the notion of what Jose talked about in terms of community. My grandma, I was raised by my grandmama, and my grandmama used to say, people don't care how much you know, i.e. information, until they know how much you care. And I think that once disinformation is out, you don't erase it. You have to build a new structure around it that's based off of ethics, that's based off of virtue, that's based off of principles. You don't necessarily just delete lies. You have to dilute their power. And how do you dilute their power? You dilute power through connectivity, through community, through conversation. Right? I think that, I was sharing with a class earlier in this week, and I was sharing how in the palm of our hand, we have more technological information, more technological power than the United States of America had to put the first man on the moon. What are we doing with this? What are we doing with this? We stay behind these screens, we become more and more disconnected, and we don't have community. So to, Jose's point, I think that the way that you are able to disarm those lies and swat down the perpetuation or help me out. These guys got
Proliferation.
Proliferation. Thank you. I'll try to say that 3 times fast. Proliferation of disinformation is that you just have, sometimes you have to talk to people. I think that we make it more complicated and we make it more sophisticated than it actually is. Sometimes simply talking to people. You talk to people, you cross the aisle. A lot of the work that I do is in and around the policy space. And you have the red team that's not talking to the blue team. And one of the things that I always say is that I've never seen a bird fly with one wing. You need a right wing and you need a left wing in order to soar. And so we need to cross the aisle in conversation so that we can bridge the gap between community and we can soar to our better selves.
I think there also needs to be an awareness that disinformation, like Kate said, and Jose, is intentional, right? It's created to divide people. So this idea of community, I think, is really, really important. But also, I think there needs to be an awareness that there is also now censorship, and I don't know if you have ever, existed in that space where censorship was the norm, but I did. So I know what that feels like. And maybe sometimes at a certain point, for me as a journalist in Egypt, where censorship was a well-known fact, we knew that certain things will be censored. So we were able to navigate around them so that we could have the ability to somehow get something out there. Like for a while, for instance, with my newspaper, we tried to push the envelope as much as we could, but sometimes I'd get a call and I get called into a special office where they would give me a talk that was not always very pleasant, and they would, they'd tell me next time, we're going to pull the paper. And pull the paper meant advertising money won't come through, all the things that are related to, the political economy of the media and all that. And so for maybe 6 months, and you will not believe this, I literally had to receive a call from someone from that office every day before we go to print and tell them what's on the front page and what's on the inside pages. And this is I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like this, but it may come, so prepare yourselves for it. I don't know. So I think there's the disinformation, the digital noise that's surrounding all of us, but there's also censorship. What are we going to do about it? We have to think about it. We have to have a strategy. Yeah.
That's awful to hear. And are we getting there? And about self-censorship?
Yeah,
Also,
that
thinking a
always
lot about
existed.
on the internet, on social media. And I think you said it so well, how quickly misinformation spread compared to the truth. And that's been proven that there are a lot of trolls out there. It's a lot of organized, tweets, etc. Even in the Swedish election campaign, the last one, now research has shown that about 25% of the tweets, in the negative campaigning, they were actually trolls. That was not human beings behind. So that makes a big difference, of course, and it's very hard to beat because the power they have and the infrastructure they have, it's immense. As for community, I would say that I would now do a small talk for libraries, because I think libraries and the public library is like infrastructure for democracy and can really bear that in a very good way, because now so much is commercialized, so much about influencers, etc. And can you keep these safe spaces for people to actually meet with different opinions and to actually have good conversations? And I've seen a lot of examples of that. We're having this project in Sweden with local democracy, and using the library as the safe place, a safe space to be in, and have really good conversation with totally opposite opinions.
Thank you. So We have a question from a student, and I'm going to try to combine some of the questions because there's similar themes here. The student wrote about social media being the conduit for disinformation. I was born in 2000. For as long as I've been interested in the news, I've relied on social media. From my perspective, the news people on TV have always felt less reliable. And we have heard just recently from Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, that the social media platform is no longer going to be monitoring disinformation in the way it was, if you remember, post-COVID, when you were seeing those little pieces of information underneath a post that might say, this is not necessarily true, or they put some kind of alert that you should check it and double check. We're not seeing that anymore. It's become overwhelming for the companies. So who's responsible for the solution here? We talk about government responsibility. We've talked about journalists' responsibility to the truth, which, at least we have the fourth pillar to be sort of doing the checks and balances. The public's responsibility, social media platforms. How are we going to get to the solution?
Come on, Jose.
Diabolical question.
Yeah, I actually wrote a book about Facebook about a decade ago, and a lot of it is market imperatives, right? I mean, he also political, in the Zuckerberg case, also sort of political imperatives, flattering sort of the current administration. But I actually think in his bones, he believes in a very thin notion of free speech, right? That monitoring, no one should. He said in some interview a few months ago that some people in good faith believe that the Holocaust never happened, and so we should let them have that viewpoint, right? And so he has a very thin notion, and we have in the United States, and I don't want to get into Section 230 too much, but we have, it's very challenging to sort of figure out how to rein in these private platforms. Because at the end of the day, as much as Facebook feels like a public sphere, it's a private platform. It's not the government. And our free speech, the First Amendment is about the government, right? It's not being able to restrict your speech. But Facebook has this more flexibility, and Section 230 gives it more flexibility. But I think at the end of the day, when I bring it back to algorithms, we get into the habit of a curated environment. Like when we, watch YouTube or listen to have social media that's already sort of reflecting our preferences, we internalize that. And I think we develop this mentality of not having a lot of tolerance for the things that we disagree with. And that's all of us, right? I think that's me. I don't want to have to deal with something that I just, somebody whose value positions or whose beliefs I don't agree with. And so the danger for all of us becomes we substitute the truth for our values. And we have this great capacity for cognitive dissonance. Anything that we don't find congruent with our value propositions, our value positions, we just cast it aside, right? What I've seen a lot, even in public discourse, is instead of using argumentation, instead of listening to somebody you disagree with, figuring out which part of the argument you think is right, and then telling that person, hey, but here's where I disagree, we use red herrings. Oh, they have an agenda. Oh, they're really just, trying to, whatever. They're on the take, or they're you can't trust them. We used to call those red herrings, right, in argumentation. That's not a legitimate, typically, that's not a legitimate argumentative point in a debate, to just sort of question the legitimacy of the person making the argument. Challenge the argument. What in the argument do you find objectionable? We don't do that anymore. We don't even bother, in many cases, to even offer our arguments to people that we disagree with. And I think that's the hallmark of a liberal society, of a liberal democracy. We need, and I talked about this in the office hours yesterday, one of my favorite philosophers, Karl Popper, talks about the hallmark of a liberal democracy, of liberal citizens, is conjecture and refutation. You offer your views of the world to people, and then they refute those beliefs, and then you determine what parts of those things, that the refutation, you think is true, and you adjust. And if we don't have the capacity to adjust our worldview, we don't have the capacity to grow, we don't have the capacity to self-govern, we don't have the capacity to sustain a democracy. So,
Yes. I like what the last thing you said, but the problem I feel is also related to what Karen was saying about self-censorship. So I mentioned censorship and then self-censorship. But if people are in a situation where they don't have the capacity to even have, to feel safe to express their opinions or their views about things, that's when things get terrible. Because you're not going to hear those opinions. And then algorithmically, this is being done, with shadow banning. I don't know how exactly that works. Maybe you can explain, but I know it means that, whatever you write, even on a post you want to put on Facebook or on Instagram, your people won't see it. If you had like a million followers, only like 10 people will see it. So that's it's a deliberate silencing, and it's also done with the technology, right? So it's very complicated. I mean, I don't have an answer to that at all, but it's really, it's a combination of everything. If people are being silenced with, because, you're putting the fear of God into them, if you have that opinion that is really different from everyone else around you, you can't really say it, otherwise you're going to be doxxed, you might lose your job. There's going to be real world consequences, right, to having those views, or to even, as a journalist, to cover the story the way it is. Sometimes, I see this in the coverage of the Middle East and what's going on in my part of the world, and I'm sure a lot of journalists that I know, like, who work for CNN, who are, or for whatever, can't actually cover the story the way it is in their mainstream media, because there are editorial policies that will stop them. There are certain words they cannot use in a story because there's a certain ethnicity that needs to be erased, right? Mm-hmm. So there are so many issues involved in the process, the editorial process even, right, that impacts the audiences who are not part of that process. So there's still gatekeeping on every level. We're not beyond that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about gatekeeping. I think it's really interesting to say, because again, about the topic, can we bring back the truth in this information age? And again, I think about 20 years ago when we were so optimistic, and you said that social media was the truth, and because there were no formal gatekeepers. And how come it didn't work out the way we wished? Probably because because of the word, because of what it's like, and because, as you say, the influencers are there instead, and there are other powers behind, and the platforms are private platforms, and they have their sort of goals and ideologies to get us into. And there is also an ongoing discussion, at least in my country, about would it be possible to have more like public service platforms to share digital information, like a public library online, but where you have these safe discussions. And we haven't seen it yet, because I know the private platforms are so strong, and so you get so addicted to them. The TikTok, and you can't leave them, and all this stuff. So it seems very difficult to make this sort of safe, interesting, moderated, in a good way, sort of digital platform. But we don't know what we will see in the future. Maybe if we go together, we can try to make something more that you can rely on, and you can have these safe conversations.
I'm sitting here, and I almost wish that I didn't go to an alternative high school and an unaccredited college, because I feel like I'm getting a master class in, in information up here, and I would have probably graduated by the time we finished this panel with a PhD. But I just, as my colleagues were speaking, I just took down some notes. And one of the things that's striking to me is that the truth can't be saved by one sector. It has to be a collective contract. And in my mind, I think that the government can set standards. I think that journalists can investigate. I think that tech platforms can tweak their algorithms, to Jose's point. But none of it is going to stick unless the public seeks truth, not as a product, but as a responsibility. And I literally had an epiphany, as I was here, and I just wrote this down as well. I said, disinformation doesn't just spread, it gets shared. Disinformation doesn't get spread, it gets shared. We're retweeting it, we're posting it, we're uploading it, etc. It gets shared. It doesn't just spread. This is not like the coronavirus, right?
It is.
Well,
It is,
to a degree, it is,
unfortunately.
right? Yeah, right. But it gets shared. It gets shared. And so, I think that for us, if we are going to be serious about solutions, then we have to really be thinking about seeking the truth as a civic duty. The same way that our civic duty is to vote, the same way that our civic duty is to participate in our democracy, the same way that our civic duty is to be a good Samaritan if we see someone in need. We have to take seeking the truth as a civic duty.
Louis, I just want to say that you don't need a PhD to be brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
I think your grandmother did a very good job.
Thank you. She would be proud to
I
hear
think
that.
your grandmother would be very proud of you. Okay.
And I was kidding about the schools as well. I got a little bit of an education.
Like I tell my students, you don't have to have a journalism degree to be a journalist.
Me too.
Right? You have to have a passion for the truth and definitely a commitment, because it's not an easy profession to be overseeing those in power. And that's not just the government, that those are in corporations and power and in religious institutions, in institutions of higher education, people in power. Anyway, so we've gotten a lot of questions from the audience about who we trust. What sources do you use as news sources? Who can they turn to? What types of sources? Where can people get their information? And sort of a related question to that, and I've got a lot of these cards in my hand. Someone asked, how do we protect the independence of government-funded media and support public media?
If you're asking me, I don't know. That's the short answer.
Okay, what do we trust? Okay. I am going to answer that, but I have a couple things that are just kind of rattling around in my head. I heard Louis talking about this unsolicited promotion of Louis. He's got there's an amazing TED Talk where he's talking about the lessons learned about leadership from incarceration. That thing blew my mind, and it just really made me kind of reframe thinking about we just the way we think about what is the value of a person that's been incarcerated, right? It's the opposite. It's actually you got a lot of leadership skills that person could really do something in an organization, but we have the opposite. Oh, don't hire that person. No, hire that person. The other thing is he was talking about, it was thinking about, when he was saying about it's up to us to kind of step in and promote the truth. There's a program, I think it's in Chicago, called the Interrupters. People who come in and try to interrupt gang violence. I'm yeah, I think people need to use that model of interrupting to sort of get in between people who are spreading disinformation, right? Because I think we very easily, and I'm going to blame, I'm more, I worked in the Democratic Party before I was, got into academia, and my sensibilities are more on the left. And I think one of the things that's happened on my side, and I won't speak to, my friends on the other side, but one of the things that's happened on my side is I think people have decided that if they have the right values, if they have the right beliefs, right, then that's enough, right? That just having the right set of beliefs about the world, about having that sign that here we believe in science, we believe in love, or whatever those signs are in the suburbs, that's enough, right? And so you can have your what's the stereotype, right? You can have your Black Lives Matter sign in your suburban front yard lawn, but then you'll go to the city council meeting, not you personally, but then somebody will go to the city council, I don't know, but then somebody will go to the city council meeting and fight an affordable housing initiative because we don't want to change the character of the community, right? So there is this sense in which getting the right that we already know, everybody here already knows what the trusted news sources are. The issue is not so much having the right information or having the right values. It's actually going out there and living it and fighting for it, and not simply being comforted by saying, well, I'm not going to talk to those people because they have odious beliefs, or they they're just spreading. I'm not going to go to Thanksgiving this year because they just I can't put up with them. It's like that's an algorithmic mentality. You're algorithmicing yourself. I don't think that's a word.
It is now.
You know what? I got a PhD. I got a PhD. That's a word, all right? Professor Marischal said that's a word. But, this is what I'm going to very gently promote the book I get the proofs next week, so it's coming out in October, but that we are developing algorithmic habits ourselves, right? So we're saying to ourselves, I don't like that. I don't like that relative because I don't like their beliefs. They may be beautiful. I'm going to say something maybe I don't know if everybody's going to agree with. There's some people who are beautiful and lovely, but they got some horrid views about things, right? I'll sometimes watch people on TV that are just beautiful and lovely, and I'm like, oh, man, I just don't want to know your politics, though. You know what I mean? But otherwise beautiful, right? And I know that might be a controversial thing to say, and I hope if I have friends back home watching this, we'll talk about it later. But I mean,
You'll talk about it over Thanksgiving.
I'll talk about it over Thanksgiving, right? I mean, I don't want to ignore the question. I think I think PBS NewsHour is very reliable and dependable. I think if you're like, well, what about on the right? There's a website on the right called Front Porch Republic, and they focus more on like localism. I go to them, So there are lots of good sites out there. Like, so I don't want to. The other one was about how do we defend public media. Public media is already mostly contributions and corporate contributions. It's very little from the government, right? I think for PBS it's something like 8 to 10%. I may be a little bit off with those numbers. So this whole question of like, well, if the government didn't fund, that 10% might be very valuable, but PBS is already very largely community and listener supported. That's why they have those really annoying week-long public media campaigns like donate, because it's almost all that anyway. It's like public universities, right? They're almost all donation-based. Increasingly very little comes from state government, right? So, that could be a problem in and of itself. But I'm not sure that that's an answer to the question. But I already think, like losing government funding of public media, it's almost all gone anyway. So,
Let's not give them a reason to cut any more, though. Okay.
Okay. So when I think about who to trust, as a journalist in my part of the world, and as someone who's always looking, at this part of the world and the journalism that's coming out of it about me, I would trust, newsrooms that are diverse, that have correspondents really on the ground all over the world, from all over the world, covering, every part of the world, versus, parachuting journalists into places that they don't know anything about, and then expecting them to get the story right. So one of the other hats I wear is as an editor for this organization called IGEB. IGEB in Arabic means positive, right? It's a solutions journalism platform that empowers journalists in the Middle East and all over Africa to get published in the international media. So it's kind of a very interesting dynamic going on between me as an editor and editors at CNN or at The Guardian, or all those different outlets that we work with Voice of America as well, with NPR sometimes. We work with all over the place. And so the thing about that outlet is that it gets the journalists on the ground in those different areas all over the world to actually cover the stories that matter about their communities. And so the picture that the audiences of those outlets will be getting is an actual pretty accurate approximation of what's going on, because it's being covered by the journalists from those regions. So I think diversity in coverage and in newsrooms is very important, and that's where I would look for, and what I would look for in terms of like which outlets to trust. Yeah.
Diversity is a curse word nowadays as well, so you can't cuss.
Sorry. There's no other word for it.
Just so that you know that. There'll be no profanity in here.
We're going to fight back.
Oh.
No, I think about trust. I think I'm very much shaped by and set from the time when I grew up, and that's, you know, but we had this collective contract as we were talking about. We did have this collective meaning of truth in another way that we do have now, at least in my country. I think I still have that trust in public service news and agencies, etc. But I think this question was so interesting when you know that the person said that I don't trust the people on television. So I mean, maybe for the new generations, maybe if you trust some influencers, that might be a good thing to do. You might think that they are reliable, good people that actually go back to facts and you share their values. So it might also be a new way of finding trust. I mean, it's easy to say that the old way was the good way, but I think we have to see this is a new media landscape, and how can young people sort of find a way in this new landscape, and how can we be there to make sure there are good information, there are fact-checking, etc. in this landscape. So.
I would like to add, just as a PS, it sounds like what everyone is talking about are credible messengers. Credible messengers. For the younger people who are in the room specifically who asked that question, and even to the general audience as well, you got to know who your audience is. You got to know who you're getting what from. And most of what is being shared up here is about from a global perspective, but most of the news that actually impacts your life on a day-to-day is on a local perspective. Who are your local sources for news, for information? Who are your local sources? You know, for instance, I'm from Bridgeport, Connecticut, and we have a paper there called the Connecticut Post, which is owned by Hearst Media. And one of the things that I noticed is that there were two reporters in particular who covers the crime beat, where every time they talked about someone who had been justice impacted, they used pejoratives, ex-felon. Even when, in some instances where people got pardons, they use just racial pejoratives in my mind. But when they talked about defendants who happened to be from affluent areas, they didn't use those pejoratives. And so one of the things that my grandmama taught me, you never call somebody out without calling them into something greater and up to something higher. And so one of the things that we did was we organized and we met with the editorial board. Why is this happening? And we presented evidence of such. You had X amount of people who these two reporters covered on these issues, and you had this class of people who these reporters covered, and you can see that there is language that seems to be pejorative in nature assigned to this group as opposed to assigned to this group. And so sometimes you just gotta understand who you're getting your information from, and you gotta get involved. You gotta know who is covering what, especially locally, on issues that are near and dear to your heart, and if whether or not these individuals are credible messengers. If they're not, call them out, call them in, and call them up.
Can I just add real quick to what Louis is saying? Is I think one of the things that social media has really damaged is local news. Like, we used to have, cities with multiple local newspapers, and we used to have indie newspapers, right? Like the free ones that you would see in like downtowns, and those have been decimated. And so one of the things you can do, right, is find the ones that are covering the news in a fair and just way. And buy a subscription for yourself. Buy a subscription for your relatives and your children or your grandchildren. Support, because that into breach, most of what affects our lives is local, and into breach, what's happening, you have these, everything's become nationalized, and so supporting local newspapers is probably I think a key way that you can help create a healthy media environment.
I think a big theme from today's discussion has been community, both in our own personal lives and both in the professional lives of these different entities, and how we fight disinformation, how we move on, and how we, not sacrifice, but protect the truth. So I want to thank our panelists for being here today and for you for coming. Thank you so much.